Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mrs. Gallagher, and today we're going to discuss fractions, decimals, and percents. Now, we can convert a fraction to a decimal, and a fraction to a percent, a decimal to a percent, and a decimal to a fraction, and a percent to a decimal, and a percent to a fraction. And that's what we're going to learn about today. So our first topic we're going to learn about is to express the percent as a fraction. And there are two steps. Our first step, step one, is we're going to write the fraction with the denominator of 100. Then our second step is to simplify the fraction. So step two is to simplify the fraction. So now let's look at example one. It says 65%. And let's think about that. 65%. If you have a test grade and it's 65%, what is 65 out of? It's out of 100. And that is why we're writing it with a denominator of 100 in step one. It says write your fraction with a denominator of 100. So we have 65 as our numerator over our denominator, which is 100. Then step two says simplify the fraction. Well, can this be simplified? Yes, it can, because we have a 5 and a 0 it ends with, and we know if something ends in a 5 and a 0, 5 goes into both numbers. So 5 goes into 65 13 times, and 5 goes into 100 20 times. Now you want to ask yourself again, can we reduce 13 over 20? No, we can't. 13 is a prime number. So your answer is 13 over 20. Let's look at example 2. We have 12%. So we're going to put 12 as our numerator over 100 as our denominator. Now you want to ask yourself, can this be simplified? Yes, it can, because they're both even numbers. So since they're both even numbers, we know that 2 goes into both 12 and 100. But let's see if we can simplify this even further. What other numbers goes into 12? Well, we know 3 goes into 12 evenly, but does 3 go into 100 evenly? No, it doesn't. What else goes into 12? We know 4 does. 4 goes into 12 3 times, but does 4 go into 100? Yes, it does. 25 times. So we're going to put 4 into both numbers, which will give us 3 over 25. And can that be simplified any further? No, it can't. 3 cannot go into 25. So that is your final answer. So now let's look at example 3, our last example, 175%. And even though this is 175% and it's greater than 100, we're still going to follow the same procedure by putting the percent 175 over 100. Our next step, step 2, is simplifying the fraction. Well, what number can both go into 175 and 100? That would be 25, and 25 goes into 175 7 times, over 25 goes into 100 4 times. Now, since this is an improper fraction, we want to make it into a mixed number. So we're going to take it a step further. So we have 7 over 4. 4 goes into 7 1 time. We have 3 left over, and the denominator stays the same. So your final answer is 1 3/4. So now what I would like you to do is a U-try section. Please complete numbers 1, 2, and 3, and we will discuss it in class. Next, let's discuss expressing a percent as a decimal. We have 2 steps. Step 1, you want to move the decimal 2 spots to the left. So step 1, move the decimal 2 spots to the left. Step 2, drop the percent sign. So step 2, we're going to drop the percent sign. So let's look at example 1. It says 150%. And if we had to place a decimal in 150, it would be placed after the 0. So let's put a decimal there. And now it says move the decimal 2 spots to the left. So we're going to take that decimal, move it 2 spots, 1, 2, to the left, and insert it between the 1 and the 5. Now you don't need the 0 there anymore. You can get rid of the 0. And then the next step is to drop the percent sign. So if we had the percent sign there, we would eliminate it. So what's your final answer? 1.5. Let's look at number 2, 85%. Again, you're going to place your decimal where it would be after the 5, and you're going to move it 2 spots to the left. 1, 2, and insert it in front of the 8. So that will give us 0.85, and then we drop the percent sign, so our answer is 0.85. Now let's look at number 3. It says 0.35%. I'm actually going to rewrite this. 0.35%. I have some room. So if you notice here, there's already a decimal, and we're going to move it 2 spots to the left. 1, 2. And insert a decimal here. So now what do you notice? We have 2 empty spaces. And whenever you have an empty or a blank spot, you're going to insert zeros. So that's a key concept. So a key concept is you want to insert zeros when there is an empty spot. So now let's rewrite this. We have 0.0035. We drop the percent sign, and that is your final answer. So what I'd like you to do is the You Try section. Please complete numbers 1, 2, and 3, and we'll discuss it in class. Next, let's discuss expressing the decimal as a percent. And I like to call that D2P. D2P. And that means a decimal, move it 2 places to make it a percent. So D2P stands for you have a decimal, you move it 2 spots, and that becomes a percent. So in step 1, we're going to move the decimal 2 spots to the right. So we're going to move the decimal 2 spots to the right. Number 2, our second step, is to add the percent sign. So we're going to add the percent sign. So let's look at example 1. It says 3.71. So using D2P, decimal, move it 2 spots to make it a percent. So you find your decimal, which is right here, and you're going to move it 2 spots to the right, 1, 2, and that's going to give you 371, and you're just adding your percent sign. So 371%. Let's look at number 2, 0.65. So again, find your decimal. You're going to move the decimal 2 spots, 1, 2. You're going to write 65, and then add your percent sign. So 65%. Now let's look at number 3. Find your decimal. Okay, you have 0.01. Again, you're moving it 2 spots to the right. Decimal 2%, D2P. Your decimal goes after the 1. So you have 1, and then you're going to add your percent sign. So you have 1%. So now what I would like you to do is a You Try section. Please complete numbers 1, 2, and 3, and we will discuss it in class. Our last conversion we're going to learn is expressing the fraction as a percent. Again, there are 2 steps. Step 1, we're going to divide the numerator by the denominator. So our step 1 is dividing the numerator by the denominator. And step 2, we're going to use D2P. We're going to make the decimal 2 spots to a percent. So step 2, we're using D2P. We're going to move the decimal 2 spots to make it into a percent. Let's look at example 1. In example 1, your fraction is 3 over 20, or 3/20. So your first step when you want to make the fraction into a percent is dividing the numerator by the denominator. So 3 divided by 20 is going to give you 0.15, 0.15. Now, if they just ask you to make the fraction into a decimal, that's all you need to do. You can stop here. But we want it as a percent. So your next step is you want to move the decimal 2 spots, 1, 2, to the right, which gives you 15, and then add a percent sign. So 15% is your answer. Let's look at number 2. You have 5 over 14, or 5/14. First step, you want to divide the numerator by the denominator. So 5 divided by 14 will give you, it equals 0.357. Again, if they just want a decimal, you would leave it here. But they're asking you for the percent. So you're going to move that decimal 2 spots, 1, 2, to the right. And that's going to equal 35.7, and add your percent sign, percent. So 35.7%. Our last example, example 3, 6/10, or 6 over 10. Again, divide the numerator by denominator, and that's going to give you 0.6. So if that was a decimal, they're asking for the decimal, that would be your answer. But here they're asking you for the percent, so you're going to take that decimal and move it 2 spots, 1, 2, to the right. Again, you have an empty space here, so you want to add a 0 when you have an empty space. So your answer is going to be 60%, because you have to add the percent sign. So now what I'd like you to do is the you try section. Please complete numbers 1, 2, and 3, and we'll discuss this in class. Thank you.